Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on sustainable and ethical procurement in schools. My name is Victoria, and I'm delighted to be hosting this session alongside with Nathan today. Good morning, Nathan.
Good morning, Victoria. It's spring is in the air, the birds are singing, the bulbs are coming up, and importantly, the Procurement Act is now live. So, yes, we're all in a joyous mood, hopefully. More because of spring than the Procurement Act, but
it does bring a smile on our faces when the sun is shining.
Certainly does.
So today we'll be exploring how schools can make procurement decisions that are both cost-effective and sustainable. Sustainability is becoming an essential factor in public procurement, with growing pressure from government regulations, stakeholders, and the wider community to adopt greener, more ethical purchasing practices. However, balancing sustainability with affordability can often feel like a challenge, especially for schools operating within tight budgets. So during this session today, we'll cover what sustainability means in the context of school procurement, how schools should set out sustainability objectives, and how the Procurement Act impacts sustainable procurement. Also, how sustainability is included in the tendering process and how DPSs and frameworks help streamline sustainability. And we're also very excited to have Josh Emery from Toshiba here with us. Good morning, Josh.
Hello, good morning. Good morning.
We'll hear from Josh a bit later on, and he is one of our brilliant suppliers on our MFD framework, and he's joining us today to discuss sustainability in the print world. Before we begin, a quick bit of housekeeping. So we're aiming for this session just to last the 30 minutes as promised, and please feel free to drop your questions into the chat at any time, and we'll either answer them during the presentation or at the end. Thank you very much. So, Nathan, what is sustainability in public procurement?
Thank you, Victoria. I make no promises will only be 30 minutes, but I'll do my very best, if that's okay. Everyone knows I can go on. Right, well, sustainable procurement. It's been around for a while, folks. We've been talking about this probably for 2 decades, maybe even longer. Everyone talks about it. Very few, well, I would say it's getting better, but previously very few have actually made lots of inroads and delivered a lot of this. But we want to bust a few myths today. A lot of people associate sustainability with, oh, it's going to increase costs, etc., etc. Not so. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be quite straightforward and quite simple. So what is sustainable procurement? Well, firstly, sustainable procurement is the process of acquiring goods, services, works, purchasing stuff in a way that achieves value for money. So that's a really important principle. It's got to be value for money, but whilst minimizing the impact of the environment, promoting things like social value and promoting economic benefits as well. So it means looking at beyond the initial cost of the purchase and considering the full life cycle impact of a purchase. So where do products come from? How are they made? What happens to them at the end of their use, etc., etc. So there's quite a lot to it, but again, it doesn't have to be complicated. A lot of people feel very sort of nervous about sustainable procurement and how you can include it within the procurement. So hopefully we'll address that today. But there are 3 pillars, generally speaking, of sustainability. One is environmental. So I think that's quite obvious, and we've certainly been well aware over the last certainly 10 years, if not 20 years, of the impact of climate change and the environment, etc. But it's about minimizing waste, prioritizing renewables, specifying eco-friendly products and producers, etc., etc. So there's an environmental factor to this as well. There is a social factor, and that things like eradicating modern slavery, promoting diversity, encouraging community-focused suppliers, and offering training opportunities. And that's something quite close to my heart. So I have an autistic son who I'm hoping at some point in the future, he's still going through education, but will have a placement in a company where they can provide support to people with autism. So that's a very real, tangible thing. And I know that there are lots of businesses that do that. Economic in terms of sustainability. So that's things like focusing on the reducing the total cost of ownership, supporting local businesses, which I know is something a lot of schools like to do, and it's been one of the standout successes of certainly our cleaning and catering solutions. Encouraging innovation. And one of the other things is around lotting contracts. That means not just awarding huge contracts to huge businesses, but can we break those contracts down and lot them in such a way that it might encourage smaller businesses to participate? Also, things like supply chain. So sometimes you have to go with a big company because it's a big requirement, but looking at their supply chain, can they help and support local small businesses? And I have an example of when we did a construction framework. Inevitably, we had to have large companies on there, but one of the requirements was that they would purchase materials from local merchants and traders, thus putting money back into the local economy. So there's lots of things, and that's really just scratching the very top level in terms of what's potential. But yes, environmental, social, economic. There is a fourth one, which the Welsh government look at, which is culture. So how can you embed outcomes relating to culture within there as well, which is quite an interesting one. But that tends to be limited to sort of more Welsh schools. I don't know if we've got any Welsh schools on the call, but there you go if you have. All right, Victoria.
Yep, so our next question is, how should schools set out sustainability objectives?
Oh, good question. It starts at the very top level. What are your overriding objectives? Now, hopefully at school, your overriding objectives are to provide education, welfare and support to obviously to pupils and young people. But within that, there is other objectives and priorities that you can easily bring into procurement. This is where a lot of people don't make the connection between procurement, the power and influence of procurement, and what you can achieve through procurement. So a lot of people just go, well, you're just buying stuff and services in order to meet a need. Well, yes, that is true, but there are other factors and influences, and procurement in itself can be quite powerful and influential. So it's about defining clear priorities. So as a school, if you've got a focus such as energy efficiency or waste reduction, or we want to be ethically sourcing, then setting that out in your procurement policies and your procurement strategy. So a strategy is we want to achieve this. A policy will be this is how we do it. So a procurement policy might say, okay, for all procurements over a certain value, we want to include a minimum criteria in the specification and in the award criteria on sustainability. There's got to be, and I'll maybe touch on this a bit later, but there's some key rules within that around we're not going to specify random stuff that doesn't have any relation to what it is you're buying. So it's got to be core to the need of the contract and relevant and proportionate. I'll come back to those two words later. But certainly embedding sustainability into your procurement policy is a great starting point. And even if it's just a stop and think question. So the best part is before you procure. So when you're deciding what it is you want to procure, hopefully you all have a contracts register and a forward procurement plan. By now, you should have listened to Nathan and got those in place. If you have, then you can look at those and go, okay, which one of these procurements lends itself to an energy efficiency outcome or a waste reduction or ethical sourcing or training and apprenticeships or something around community benefits. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to achieve everything in one procurement. You could just go for one thing. And often the best outcomes are simple and straightforward. Following that, you can engage then with suppliers on that basis. So when you go out to market, when you go out to tender, suppliers are clear and you've got criteria around that. You specify that. And it's always good to specify those outcomes, not just leave it up to suppliers. Although suppliers, we want them to be innovative in their responses to tenders. We want them to come up with solutions. But if you specify, we want you to come up with an energy efficiency solution for this, then yes, that's fine, as long as it's in the specification. And then that can form part of the award criteria. So it's not the whole award, but all things being equal, it could come down to that. And then the important thing is tracking and measuring the impact. So within the contract, having a KPI or some sort of performance measure where you can say to the supplier, okay, how are we doing on this? How are we doing in terms of training opportunities? How are we doing on ethical sourcing? Let's have a look at your supply. So there's all these different ways of tracking and measuring it. But keep it simple. Don't, because the more you put into it, yes, the likelihood is you could build in more cost. Some people are happy with that. It's like your own purchasing. You may decide to purchase organic veg from the organic veg section in the supermarket, which is very small and very expensive, or you go for the normal veg, which has been, I don't know, covered in all sorts of wonderful chemicals. You make a decision when you go shopping, and sometimes that decision is, I want to pay more because I want to know that it's from a organic, background or whatever. So it's a similar concept in that sometimes you can make a decision, and that goes back to your school's sustainable objectives. That's a very difficult one to rationalize because school budgets obviously are very tight, and that can be a bit of a compromise, but there are ways of achieving small outcomes that don't actually cost a lot, and a lot of suppliers are already doing things anyway. It's just that you may not be aware of it, and I'm sure we're going to hear some wonderful stuff from Josh shortly. But there are key influences on sustainable procurement. So the new National Procurement Policy Statement, which is, I've got it here, it's literally warm off my printer. It came out a couple of weeks ago. The ink is still drying on its sustainable paper. But there are things in there which are helpful. We'll go into that a little bit, but you may also have your own school ethos and values, local authority policies. We know the UK government's got targets around climate change, etc. So there are enough drivers to justify it, is what I'm saying. So is that okay, Victor?
Absolutely fine, thank you. So how does the Procurement Act impact sustainable procurement?
Yes, so this is an interesting one. So this, obviously, for those who, I'm hoping everyone is aware, the new Procurement Act came into force on Monday, the 24th of February. So it is very new. And alongside that came the National Procurement Policy Statement. So that is the main driver around sustainable procurement, is actually the National Procurement Policy Statement. So the Act itself doesn't actually mention sustainability or social value. It says you must have regard to the National Procurement Policy Statement, and your procurement should be undertaken in a way that maximizes public benefit. Interpret that as you will, folks. But if you look at the National Procurement Policy Statement, of which where it says there on the slide, the National Procurement Policy Statement, that's actually a link I've put in to the actual. It's not very long. The main section of it's only about 6 pages, and I've got it here. So there are a number of things. So there's 3 areas that the National Procurement Policy Statement want to push on. There's social and economic value, economic growth, and building commercial capability. These are the words from there. So driving economic growth. So it says contracting authorities should maximise procurement spend with small and medium enterprises and voluntary community and social enterprises. So there you go. There's a something you have to have regard to there. It also says contracting authorities should ensure their suppliers are committed to providing high quality jobs, safe and health working conditions, fair pay, opportunity and progression for workers. Very interesting. Under social and economic value, it says contracting authorities should secure social and economic value which supports the delivery of the national missions, taking into account priorities in local and regional economic growth plans. You have to get through some of the political wording on this, but and read between the lines a bit. Contracting authorities should ensure their suppliers are actively working to tackle bribery, corruption, fraud, modern slavery, and human rights violations and environmental impact, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, minimizing waste, etc., etc. Building commercial capability. That that's an interesting one. It said contracting authorities should apply commercial best practice, including the principles and policies in the government's playbook series, and make decisions based on value for money and service quality when assessing delivery models. And contracts authorities should benchmark their organisational capability and workforce capacity to ensure they have the appropriate procurement and contract management skills and capacity necessary to deliver value for money. So that is a little bit of an excerpt from the National Procurement Policy Statement. But there are basically what you have to do is have regard to those when procuring. The way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to take this National Procurement Policy Statement, I'm going to put it into a little bit of a checklist. And when I do a procurement, and this is a really important stage, the early pre-procurement stage, I'm going to go along this and go, which is relevant and proportionate to my procurement. So it wouldn't be proportionate to seek to bring in, 10 apprenticeships for a fencing contractor to refence the school playground. That would be disproportionate because the cost of that would outweigh the benefit of the contract. However, it wouldn't be unreasonable to do that for a complete school new build because the value of the contract. So again, think about proportionality in terms of cost of the social value outcome and also relevance. Are we asking for something that's irrelevant to the core contract? So I think have a look at the National Procurement Policy Statement. Like I say, the link's in there, and it is something that you must have regard to and interpret that as you will. But basically, you must consider it. But there are no, as far as I'm aware, there's no sort of legal obligation to achieve it. So we'll see how this pans out over the course of these regulations over the next, couple of years.
Yeah, and obviously it is good practice, regardless, anyhow, to include all of this in your tendering process. So, Nathan, how is sustainability included in the tendering process?
Yes. So there's a really, really important stage in any procurement, and it's called the pre-tender stage or the pre-procurement stage. This is the stage at which you have the most influence, for good or for bad, in your procurement. So defining the goals and defining the outcomes that you want to achieve through this procurement. So for many people, the outcome is we just want to re-procure this because the contract's expiring. Yes, that's a noble cause, and a good one. However, a lot of people fail to realise the potential of their procurement beyond just the need to ensure that the cleaning service still works, the catering is still delivering, the office supplies are still flowing in. There are other potential outcomes beyond just purchasing those things, and this is where we can, at this stage, at pre-tender stage, we can consider those. So defining those outcomes, is it relevant, is it proportionate in terms of the value, etc., and looking at the National Procurement Policy Statement requirements, ticking which ones could be relevant to that. So we might think, okay, let's pick one, cleaning services. We need to re-procure that. So what could be a relevant and proportionate sustainability outcome? Okay, so possibly training opportunities, fair wages, because it is an industry that struggles in that regard, and also use of environmental products. So many of you probably sat there thinking, well, we already have that written into our contracts. You'd be surprised by how many don't, and I see that. So those are pretty good, straightforward, simple, sustainable outcomes. What do we then do? We need to write them into the specification. So within the specification, we set out clear sustainability requirements that suppliers must meet. It's always better to specify than leave it wide open. Although sometimes, if you're not quite sure and you're not sure what's relevant and proportionate, it's okay to put a question in the quality section to say, what could you do to achieve a sustainable outcome? So then that way you leave it as an open thing for the supplier to propose. And that's great. And that leaves it innovative and open. But specifying it is probably the better way. Once you've specified it, you've then got the justification to include it in the selection and award criteria. So have you got the experience of delivering this? So selection criteria is backward looking. It assesses the bidder only, their policies, procedures. So you might want to check their environmental credentials. You might want to check their, their EDI principles. You might want to check their modern slavery statement, all those sort of good things. And a lot of that is going to be defined in what we call the conditions of participation in the new Procurement Act. So there's minimum requirements in there now anyway, but also in terms of the award criteria. So as mentioned, you could obviously cost is a pretty worthy element of the award criteria. Other quality factors, can you meet our timescale? Can you deliver to this, etc. But within there, you might want to include some percentage weighting on the sustainability outcome. So what can you do to help the school achieve its ethos of energy efficiency? Linking it back to the school's strategic outcomes and requirements, because you've identified it at pre-tender stage, because you've specified it, that gives you the full justification to ask it. And then we come to a contract award, and it's about that performance monitoring. So within the contract, you want to have a schedule there with some performance indicators whereby you can measure the ongoing delivery and impact of that. And again, that's something that's covered in the National Procurement Policy Statement as well. So it's not rocket science, folks. You just got to think early, and then it's what we call the golden thread. You've got to follow that thread through the process and ensure that at each of the key stages of that procurement process, it's covered.
Thank you, Nathan. So now that we've covered how the Procurement Act 2023 embeds sustainability into the tendering process, we're going to take a closer look at a real-world example of a supplier committed to sustainability, which is Toshiba, one of our trusted suppliers on the MFD framework, and they have been leading the way in sustainable printing solutions for schools. So I'd like you to introduce you to Josh from Toshiba, who's going to share his insights into how Toshiba integrates sustainability at every stage of the procurement process. Over to you, Josh.
Hello, thank you very much. Thanks for having me today. My name is Josh Emery and I head up the corporate sales team here at Toshiba. I'm really pleased to join today and share some insights from us, not only as a UK supplier for education buying members, but also as a global manufacturer. I'm a scientist at heart. I've got a degree in biology. So what we're talking about today is something I value tremendously, and I push our teams internally to continue to learn more and more about. Next slide, please. So firstly, my apologies if I'm repeating anything kind of already touched upon, but it's all really important. It can be hard to balance sustainability goals with budgets and other key requirements, but if you can ensure that a supplier's values align with your own, you're already off to a good start. Company mission statements or corporate philosophies are easy to obtain these days from a company's website. On the right-hand side here, you've got Toshiba's corporate philosophy, which is committed to people, committed to the future. So everything that we do is in pursuit of that goal from both an environmental and social perspective. These overarching headlines are great, but what you should be asking is, what is the supplier doing behind the scenes to truly make a difference? Are there clear objectives? Are they actionable? Are they transparent? And are they measurable? On the left-hand side here are some of the values, goals and practices that we have at Toshiba as a sustainable supplier. But when investigating a supplier's eco-credentials, things to look out for could include circular economy. So in our world, that's about designing and manufacturing eco-conscious products that enable us to reuse as many materials as possible for future generations of devices. Our own staff environmental education, so teaching and promoting within our teams environmentally conscious behaviours and processes, and creating sustainable supply chains, including simple things like using low emission vehicles and using recyclable packaging. Next slide, please. Leading by example is important, and that's what these next couple of slides are about, putting values into practice. So now what's great is that there are governing bodies and some typical accreditations that you can look out for, so you know that you're working with a sustainable supplier. Here's a few examples of what we have at Toshiba. You may be familiar with things like the WEEE stamp on the top right-hand side there, which ensures that we're recycling electronic equipment properly and responsibly. Then there are some others around environmental management, so the ISO 14001. restriction of the use of hazardous substances in manufacturing processes, so the ROHS, and carbon neutrality. We have the PAS 2060 accreditation here in the UK. These are just a few examples of what you can look out for. These governing bodies not only help us constantly reflect and improve upon our services so that we keep up to speed with the latest regulations, but they also help us communicate with our customers at a very high level that you're investing in an ethical partner. Next slide, please. So companies like Toshiba will also invest on your behalf into schemes and initiatives that have real impact on the environment and our society. An example of this from Toshiba is a brand new initiative with a company called Clean Hub, who help prevent plastics from ending up in our oceans and coastal environments. Through this initiative, your investments with us help fund waste collections in plastic pollution hotspots across the globe. Some other initiatives that you may come across could be to do with carbon offsetting, tree planting, and volunteering in the local community. Next slide, please. So when you have tight budgets to contend with, price is of course always going to be a driver. Oh, slide before. That's the one. Yeah, so price is always going to be a driver. However, we know the cheapest or equally the most expensive solutions are not always the most environmentally friendly. It's not always this simple, but within the services that Toshiba supply, when we print less, we ultimately consume less and inevitably will spend less. Eco-conscious printing, which for example could be ensuring we're printing only what's necessary, promoting double-sided printing, and introducing follow me printing to prevent wastage. Ultimately, that leads to cost-conscious printing. Our teams here at Toshiba will work with you to understand the impact of printing from both a cost and resource consumption perspective. We then work with you to build a long-term print strategy that drives down your cost and environmental impact. And final slide, please. So only a real short time with you here today, and there's so much more that we could speak about. But here's a quick recap from our perspective of the things to look out for, a checklist of things to bear in mind with suppliers, some questions to ask yourself in regards to the technology, the item or the service that you're looking to procure, and then some points for further down the line in terms of usage and learnings. That's it from me. I hope some of that was helpful. We've got plenty more resources to help you with sustainable procurement, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions today if you'd like to get in touch separately. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Josh. We have got a question, but I'm going to take them at the end, just aware of the time. So we'll come back to it at the end. So,
yeah, no worries.
Nathan, how can DPESs and frameworks help streamline sustainability?
Yeah, sure. So obviously education buying, we have a number of existing dynamic purchasing systems and frameworks. Here they are, as for you to good people to see. Now, all of those have already embedded within them some sustainable outcomes, either in the specification or the award criteria. But it also enables, so certainly for the dynamic purchasing systems where you're undertaking what's called a further competition. So you access the list of the approved suppliers, of which we check their various sustainable accreditations and their sustainable practices, etc., before they're even on to the list, the approved list. But certainly for things like catering and cleaning, audits, HR, payroll, accountancy, finance, the ones where we run a further competition, you can also include specific questions and adjust the weightings of those around sustainability. So a lot of the hard work is already done and embedded, and we've had some really, really good, fantastic sustainable outcomes delivered through our existing products. So catering services, examples of providers putting in vegetable gardens in schools, not in the middle of the school, I would say, outside the school, but appropriate, and that helps the children to understand the food production process, visits to farms and suppliers, We draw the line at abattoirs, obviously. Cleaning services, there's already things in there around, I mentioned earlier, safe cleaning products, environmentally friendly cleaning products, waste reduction, etc. So again, it's proportionate and relevant, realistic, and for our printers and copiers, we have Josh here, who has worked hard to provide some sustainable outcomes for you already within that. So I think these do offer a sort of a menu of options already for sustainable procurement outcomes, where you don't have to worry too much about coming up with a solution yourselves. That's the main advantage.
Thank you, Nathan. We have popped into the chat our link to our website where you can register. So if you are not already registered with us and you want to access any of those frameworks or DPSs, all you need to do is register, and then you'll have access to all of those. And if you do want to hear more from Nathan, we still are running procurement reform training with all the changes that have been happening. And we have got some further sessions planned. So this is a 3-hour session for £60. And the next session is on the 11th of March and then the 9th of April.
That would be Tuesday, Victoria, wouldn't it? Yes.
Yes, I presume
next Tuesday. Who would not want to spend 3 hours on a Tuesday morning with me talking about Procurement Act? I mean, that is the pinnacle of your careers, folks. So get booked on. If not, Tuesday's too near. I get it. You're busy. Yes, as Victoria says, we have a session in April, do we? Yes.
Yeah, 9th of April from 9:30 to 12:30.
I put my retirement on hold for that, just so you know.
I think there's a link in the chat to the booking form for that if you're interested in that. And I can't believe this, we have one webinar left this academic year. So you can sign up on the link in the chat there, where we'll be talking about a very important topic of navigating contract management and compliance. So we do look forward to seeing you on our next. I know it doesn't feel. It
feels like we've been on a journey, folks, doesn't it? We've been right from the start. We've seen the new Procurement Act come in. We're ending this well. We're going to do this well. We're going to go out with a bang. So get in there, Friday, 9th of May.
Excellent, thank you, Nathan. Right, so we did have a question. I'm just going to bring up that chat, which was around. I'm going to go back with that. I think it was around. Yes, we are sending out the recording after the meeting, not straight after the meeting, but it will be next week. So that there was a question around that. The question was, are Toshiba on the DFE framework? Now, DFEs don't actually have their own frameworks, I'm presuming. Are you on an approved DFE framework?
Yes, we are. I don't know how many frameworks I can list off on today's call, being that we're on the education buying framework call. But yes, yeah, we are. So please reach out and we can help.
Excellent, thank you, Josh. Wonderful. And thank you very much for joining us today. And we're not too bad on time. We're 4 minutes over. There you go.
That's why I never promise, Victoria. All right, thank you very much, folks.
1 minute late, so it could be.
Enjoy the sunshine this weekend. Have a lovely weekend. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, guys. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.